Hey all, Baruch Levi, B here from Soul Centered. Thanks for joining into the Defiant Spirit podcast. I'm doing it as both a podcast format, but also as a video, so you can watch it on YouTube or you can listen to it on various podcast platforms. But I'm excited to jump into last minute topic. I wasn't planning on talking about it, but I was just journaling this morning and ended up reflecting on a movie that my family and I just saw. I know we're not the only ones because it just broke box office records. And that is, you know what it is? Top Gun 2 Maverick. I think it's called Top Gun Maverick, but it's the second sequel to the original Top Gun, which was like 30 plus years ago. So, of course, you've seen it or you've seen promotions, trailers of it. You know who's in it, Tom Cruise. Now, I would have never thought prior to seeing this movie that I'd be talking about it on the Defiant Spirit podcast. But let me tell you why. And look, I'm no movie critic. I'm not talking about it from the perspective of, movie qualities. I mean, it was a good score. It was good cinematography. It was great cinematography. I liked it in no small measure because there were, I think, no special effects, very few special effects. I mean, there was a lot of airplanes, a lot of flying, but there was some real time from what I understand. It wasn't fake. So it was a great movie, but that's not what I want to talk to you about. I want to share with you some thoughts that came up for me around Tom Cruise. And I thought today we'd touch on two different aspects of Tom Cruise. And that is the first is the Afternoon of Life, which is Carl Jung's famous statement. I'm going to read it actually. Thoroughly unprepared, we take the step into the afternoon of life. That would be 40 years onwards from Carl Jung's definition of the second half of life or afternoon of life. We take this step with the false presupposition that our truths and ideas will serve as hitherto, but we cannot live the afternoon of life according to the program of life's morning. Here it is. For what was great in the morning of our life will be little at evening, and what in the morning was true will at evening have become a lie. I want to talk about Tom Cruise and the afternoon versus the morning of life. I want to talk about what I think, at least what I saw, excuse me, what I saw in this movie wasn't just Maverick, the fighter pilot in the movie, though I think he did portray this as well, but it was also Tom Cruise, the man, and a afternoon of life realization that was quite refreshing, certainly from a Hollywood perspective, but I think any perspective. And I also maybe will have time and I'll touch upon the Enneagram 3. As many of you know, if not, you'll learn soon. I really only have two topics I talk about anymore, maybe three. Number one is logotherapy, the work of Viktor Frankl, meaning, purpose centered living. I'm a logotherapist. But it's not about therapy nearly as much as living a life with purpose and meaning. And that's central. That we are a defiant spirit. It's where it comes from, Dr. Frankl. That we are a defiant spirit, that we are not bound by any limits or limitations other than those that we accept into our lives, and especially not numbers. Well, I also am passionate about the Enneagram. The Enneagram, people don't know how to usually say it. One lady just asked if I could give her an enneagram. I said, I'm not even touching that with a 10-foot pole. I don't even know what that is, but it sounds terrible. But the Ennea means 9. Gram is a picture. So it's a picture of 9. I don't have it in front of me, but excuse me, I'm choking. I usually do, but it's a personality assessment. It's so much more than that, and we'll touch upon that. But it goes hand in glove for me with Dr. Frankl, because Dr. Frankl talked about living our defiant spirit, and the Enneagram talks about what happens when we give up consciousness, when we go into autopilot, when we go into fear. We become a number, we become a type. You are not an Enneagram number. That is where you go in reaction or in fear. And what Dr. Frankl teaches is we're not here to live in reaction. We're here to respond. I have an entire online program now called Defy Your Number. So jump over to the defiantspirit.org where you can learn more about that. Take an Enneagram assessment, learn how to discover your number so you can defy it. Tom Cruise is a quintessential Enneagram 3, oftentimes called the achiever. They are the prom king, the prom queen, the quarterback, the varsity or the head cheerleader. They're the CEO. They're the professional athlete. They're the winners. They are the beautiful people, and they happen to oftentimes be very attractive people. Tom Cruise, perfect example, right? Just the all-American, good-looking winner. And so he is a 3, but there's a lot of shadows that come with Enneagram 3. There's a lot of shadows that come with any type. And we can end up in the lower side of our type, an unhealthy version of it, or we can defy our number. We can ascend beyond our number and access all the numbers. Well, I saw a growth in Tom Cruise that obviously wasn't there 30 years ago. None of us are the same 30 years later, but this man seems to have really grown up in deep, deep ways over these past 3+ decades. Was it more than that? I think it was more than that, actually. 40 years? No, 35 years? I don't know. Okay, so we'll touch upon Enneagram 3, but I want to start with the Afternoon of Life because in my work as a logotherapist, as a executive coach, as a spiritual guide, um, I see a lot of people in general, men in particular, not wanting to fully. No, it's not just true. It's men and women are equal. They just do it in my experience different ways. Men and women are wired differently and react, I think, in some ways to the afternoon of life differently. But at least with the men I've coached, I've seen oftentimes the afternoon of life, the second half of life, wanting to change their context and not the content. What do I mean by that? You get to a point in life, the afternoon of life, second half of life, midlife and onwards, where not always, but often you start to feel suffocated. You can feel a sense of it's ordinary, it's mundane, it's not meaningful, it's not enough. You know that phrase, that quote, I climbed the ladder of success to realize it was leaning against the wrong wall. Or a teacher of mine, of Harold Schulweis, a blessed memory. Was it Harold? No, it was Harold Kushner. I think Harold Kushner's still living. When all you ever wanted isn't enough. Is that the name of his book? Yeah, I think that was. When Bad Things Happen to Good People was another book of his. But at any rate, you get to a point in midlife when you've achieved so much of what you thought you wanted, and then it's not enough. Well, an immediate reaction, and we're not here to live in reaction. It's not good, but it's natural, is to want to pick up and change. So I see it a lot with guys. They want to change their career, their job, their profession, their spouse. My dad went through this in a very devastating way and changed his spouse, changed his community, changed his professions. In the end, he ended up going down a very tragic path and dying. But I see it in far, less extreme ways too. It's the proverbial or the cliche sports car, right? If I just buy that sports car, whatever the fill in the blank is, somehow I'll awaken that peace within me that I used to feel, at age 20 and 30, the vitality, if I pop that pill, I'll feel that vitality. It never works, at least not for long. We do great damage when we try and just change our context as opposed to the content, going inwards, looking inwards, digging deep and changing who we are and the rules of the road, the ways that we operate, the goals that we pursue. So we do a lot of damage because, we'll oftentimes be in a marriage that's good. Maybe it's not great, or it's fine. It's not good. And I'm not saying there isn't a place for divorce. And I'm not saying there's not a right time to change your context. But first and foremost, always look at where you stand. Look at what you can do around you before you change your profession. Maybe it's a new way to approach your profession. Maybe it's a new job within your profession. Maybe it's a new taking your profession and doing something with it, consulting or whatever it is, but just rushing off and leaving all that wisdom experience behind you. If you can utilize it, that's not growth. That's irresponsible. again, doesn't mean you can't or shouldn't change your professions. God knows I have. I'm in a radically different place than I was 7, 8, 10 years ago. But first and foremost, stand your ground, see if you can change where you are. Now, if you can't, then you start messing with changing, manipulating the world around you. What does it have to do with Top Gun? Well, many people in Tom Cruise's situations, especially in Hollywood, but just in general, keep trying to recreate the past in new ways. You saw before he died, Hugh Hefner as a, you know, cliche of this. Instead of staying with the same person, he would change the Playboy bunny that was in the picture. Um, not to go down this path too far, not to judge him too harshly, but he became sort of a laughing stock because, here was this 60-year-old, 70-year-old, 80-year-old man with women who were his granddaughter's age, maybe even his great granddaughter's age at some point. And I'm not passing judgment nearly as much as saying it doesn't work. That's why he had to keep changing the context. In this case, the partner, the person, the woman that he was with. It's not the deepest way to go about life, as opposed to looking at ourselves, embracing where we are in life, embracing, right, who we are at the stage in life, those stages of life. Back to Carl Jung. The morning of life is amazing in the morning of life. When you're 20 something or 30 something, it's absolutely appropriate and essential to pursue morning of life stuff. In the afternoon of life, if we pursue it in the same ways we did the morning, it's not appropriate. It can even be destructive or devastating. When I see some of my contemporaries, now I'm 50 years old, on Facebook, right, with party pics from a nightclub or something that they went to, it just doesn't strike me as meaningful as it did when we were 20 or 30 something. I'd rather see pics at this point of their children and their grandchildren pretty soon necessarily than bar pics. But again, that's not the point. The point is that it's just too easy to try and go back to those morning of life rules, and how to find happiness and meaning by those morning of life rules is different by necessity than the afternoon of life. Well, back to Tom Cruise. I was expecting to see Top Gun 2. I was expecting to see a Tom Cruise that was, forgive me, Botoxed up, no wrinkles. I mean, he was pretty darn ripped and good shape, but he still looked like I guess he's close to 60 at this point, or 60. He still looked like a very healthy and fit 60-year-old man. We can sit here and go, oh, that doesn't look like 60. That does look like 60. That's what 60 can look like if you take care of yourself within reason. That's not even take care of yourself. That's above and beyond. But it was, I don't know if he's had anything artificially done, but it just didn't look artificial. But more than just physical looks, it didn't feel like he was trying to cover up his age. In the movie, the character, in many ways, I think reflected Tom Cruise. It's interesting. He's an Enneagram 3 in real life, and he plays Enneagram 3s. All of his characters are, almost all of them are like this Enneagram 3 Tom Cruise version in the movies. And his character, Maverick, I forgot his real name, but Maverick in the movie, you could tell, was grappling with the afternoon of life. He was trying to somewhat live like the morning of life, but he wasn't fighting it. In the movie, he was coming to terms with where he was in life. He understood that he was sort of on his last legs professionally. It was time for him to transition to the next act. He was really grappling with it. It wasn't, developed all that much in the movie, but you could see it was there with his life choices of having pursued his career or his passion of, being a pilot and not making a life, in this case with Jennifer Connelly's character in the movie. Although I think she had replaced, what's her name? You would remind me if you were here, Kelly McGillis. I don't think Jennifer Connelly was in the first movie, but that's neither here nor there. You could tell he was really grappling with being a father. He wasn't technically a father, but he had become a father figure to one of the characters in the movie. He the way he looked at Jennifer Connelly's daughter was almost fatherly. And you could really see in the movie he was grappling with his life choices, but also that he couldn't continue to try and live like the morning of life. And he was throughout the movie, I don't think this is really a spoiler alert, he was really shifting his goals into the afternoon of life. And that's sort of where the movie ended. They didn't develop it. It's still an action movie. It's still Hollywood. It's still, got some ridiculous, impossible things for probably a 60-year-old to do, like flying Mach 10. I don't know. Seems impossible. But nonetheless, it was a pleasant surprise to see this character and this man really not trying to continue to perpetuate the morning of life, but rewrite his life around a better set of rules for when you're 50 or 60 or beyond. And so really, I can't say enough good things about it from that perspective. And I certainly didn't go to it looking for that or thinking about it, but that's what I walked away from with this movie. Again, just with that Jungian idea, for what was great in the morning will be little at evening, and what in the morning was true at evening will become a lie. Because for the Enneagram 3, this is a good message. I don't have any of my graphs or charts in front of me. You can jump over to defiantspirit.org and get the Enneagram 3 free videos. I have a couple free videos on it. So again, recap, the Enneagram 3 is essentially Tom Cruise in real life. And they are told the entirety of their life that they are what they do or what they achieve. So for an Enneagram type 3, the achiever, I'll just call the achiever starts to equate their worth with their production value. So it's not just enough to work hard like the 8s. I react like an Enneagram 8. We work hard, but Enneagram 3s really defined their worth at a different level than any other type around what they do. And so the converse of that is true, that when they don't do, or when they fail at what they're doing, it's not that they're failing at what they're doing, it's that they are a failure. So Enneagram 3s quite often gravitate towards workaholicism. I don't know how you say it, but you know what it is. They become workaholics. They work too hard. They become human doings, as Wayne Dyer says, not human beings. And so the work for an Enneagram 3 is to shift from that outward, superficial. They're one of the more superficial of Enneagram types. If they react, if they're unconscious, if they're in fear, it's not who they are, it's how they react. Like an Enneagram 7 also can be very superficial, a couple other types, but they're the two primary superficial ones if they're not conscious, because they're putting all their attention on the externals, whether it's the external of the way they look, their face, their body, their image, or whether it's the externals of their production value, their particular work. And they believe that's who they are. So they measure themselves by that yardstick. So you can hear where this is going, because the Enneagram 3s, if they're unconscious and react, they peak. They're the ones who sit around talking about the glory days. Right, I hear the Bruce Springsteen song "Glory Days." Was it Bruce Springsteen or John Cougar Mellencamp? I think it was Bruce Springsteen. And they peak, because you peak around 20 something if you're talking about athletics, and then you're a has-been at that point, or you peak in your earning capacity and power sometime around midlife. Whatever it is, it's all downhill from there. And you see this with the unhealthy or unconscious Enneagram 3s, because they'll try and keep it going. They'll try and do, the Hugh Hefner thing. Although I think he was an Enneagram 7, but they'll still continue to try and change their context or defy gravity by propping things up or whatever it is, as opposed to going inwards. Now, I work with Enneagram 3s, multiple Enneagram 3s who are defiant spirits, and they have decided to stop reacting and start responding. And so they're not going outwards to make external changes. They're going inwards to develop those deeper aspects of themselves that, frankly, they were never asked or forced to deal with. One of the greatest blessings for an Enneagram 3 is when they experience tragedy. Don't wish it upon anybody. Don't go seeking it. But here's the truth about life. You don't have to go seeking tragedy. It'll find you. I can't work, especially with an Enneagram 3 male, until they've gone through a shattering. That's what Kabbalah calls it, or we might call it a tragedy, where their heart is shattered into 1,000 pieces. It could be a divorce. Oftentimes it's a death of a parent, especially for a man, and his death of his father. It can be professional, financial. It doesn't really matter what it is. But all of a sudden, they realize they can't get away based on their good looks or charisma or talents. That only goes so far for so long. And then you either dig deeper and find something else, or you just keep throwing more of the same at it and you get diminishing returns. And so and that's true also with the 7 oftentimes, I'll really need for them to have gone through a shattering. But once they have, and they're willing to look inwards and do the work, they can go real deep real quickly because they're motivated. They're no longer able to use that kind of escape hatch of wealth or power or money or looks, whatever it is. And so they have to reevaluate their lives. Well, that's what Tom Cruise at least appears to have done in the movie. I don't know much about Tom Cruise in his personal life, but at least in the movie, he was really coming up against that. The shattering for him being that, they're passing him by technologically and age-wise, and the military was moving on from having manned pilots in the movie. I don't know how true it is in real life. I'm sure it's not far-fetched. And you could see a man who was staring at himself in many ways in the mirror. There were some very tender moments in the movie, by the way, where he really teared up and cried when he watched. Well, I won't go into it. I don't want to do any spoiler alerts, but it was just a sensitivity that there was 100% not there in the first Top Gun or pretty much any movie I've ever seen with Tom Cruise. But it was there. And I don't think that you can fake that. I imagine he has done some contemplative work. It seems to me like he has. I know he was into Scientology for a long time. But nonetheless, I think he seems to have grown as a person. Doesn't matter. It's neither here nor there because this isn't about Tom Cruise or Top Gun. This is about anybody who's in the afternoon of life and anybody who's an Enneagram 3 who is either in the afternoon of life or not in the not in the afternoon of life, who wants to stop reacting, who wants to stop living on autopilot or defaulting to our hardwiring. That's a conversation I have a lot with people now around the Enneagram. Your personality is not you. Your personality, if you're an Enneagram 3 or an 8, which is a challenger, or a 1, which is a perfectionist or reformer, it's not who you are. It's how you were wired. You didn't choose to be wired this way. Is it nature? Is it nurture? Is it soul contract? Is it this worldly? I don't know. I don't really care. I'm a pragmatist. It is what it is. The question is, can we change the wiring? And the answer is no. You cannot change your hard wiring. We're wired this way, but it does not mean that you are without a choice. This is my Viktor Frankl piece. You are a spirit. You are not your body. You are not your brain. You are not your psychology, your psyche, your personality. Those are aspects of you, but the true you is your nous. Dr. Frankl would say your true self, you might say, or your spirit. And when you remember that, when you return to that place, you tap into the true you. And this is what Frankl talks about, the defiant power of the human spirit. From that place, you can defy your operating system. You can't change it. I don't care what people are saying out there. Our wiring is our wiring. We can change our response. We can change our attitude. We can change our direction, right? Our actions. But that means we become conscious. We take back the power of consciousness, come off of autopilot, and stop reacting. So some of the work of an Enneagram 3 is to stop reacting by doing and start responding by being, by letting go. You could see it in the movie. There was a great scene, this isn't much of a spoiler, where Tom Cruise and Jennifer Connelly's character are about to get together, and it seems like it's going to be a sexual scene. And I think in Top Gun, it was a sexual scene. And every other Tom Cruise movie, I'm sure there is one of those scenes. But in this movie, it's almost like they skipped over the scene so that they could talk. And I thought, oh man, that is really an interesting shift. So my son, who's 11, still kind of at that eye covering stage. He's a self covering type, so we don't have to cover. He does it for himself. And he was covering his eyes, and we looked, and he covering, and then we forgot he was covering his eyes. Like 5 minutes later, he's still covering his eyes. Like, can I look? There was actually never anything he couldn't look at, was the point. It was kind of funny, but I thought it was very beautiful. Not that 60-year-olds can't have good, passionate sex. We'll have that conversation another time. But it is that it was not about sex. In that scene, you could really feel it was more of an intimacy, because you get to a point in life, 40, 50 onwards, where sex, yes, is still a thing, but it's not the only thing or even the main thing. It's a means to an end. And what's the end? It's not about changing your partners. It's not about quantity. It's about quality. It's about depth. It's about intimacy, intimacy. So the work of an Enneagram 3 is to stop going wide and to start to go deep. And they have to make a conscious choice to be present, to be with whoever is across from them, to not want quantity, but to want quality, and to defy their nature, their wiring, which is to do and to produce and to achieve, and just to be present and to know that that's enough and that they are enough. So that's kind of my take on Top Gun 2 Maverick, the afternoon of life, and new ways to think about this stage in life with new goals and new rules. And it's about the Enneagram 3. And yet another way, the Enneagram 3s, the achiever type, can defy their number and live from a deeper place. As an aside, even if you're not an Enneagram 3, America is an Enneagram 3 culture. So we all have it in us. We all can benefit from the ethos, the essence of this movie, and the message of the Enneagram 3 and the Defiant Spirit take on it. Jump over to defiantspirit.org. Check out my free offerings around Defy Your Number, a little starter taste of my new introductory program. So you can take the Enneagram assessment for free. You can get those videos for free. And then you can always follow up with exploring the Defy Your Number program. Stay tuned. More to come on all things Enneagram and Dr. Viktor Frankl, synthesized for probably the first and only place you'll ever find it here, called The Defiant Spirit. Again, I'm B. Would love to hear from you. Shoot me an email, baruch@mysoulcentered.org. Until the next time, shalom, salam, namaste, peace.